Howdy, folks. Chuck Shealy here today with Inside Cool Music Magazine, where we tell the compelling stories from authentic musicians, the real deal, the people who wake up in F sharp and just go and live life in a key every day. And so we're very happy that you're here with us for another compelling interview. Today, we're here with Tracy Silverman, who is basically the pioneer of electric violin in our world, one of very few anyway. He takes a very unique approach with six strings, amps, and you name it. And his background's incredible. He's on the faculty at Belmont in Nashville, and he's a Juilliard student. And the rest is just doing it in on and off the stage. He has his own classes and his own bona fide technique. But the most compelling thing about Tracy Silverman is the way he views the role of the violin in today's world. Tracy,
Ah,
how the hell are you, man?
I'm good, Chuck. Good to see you, man. And I have to confess, I do not wake up in F sharp. I wake up in G because I'm a string player. So
G, the
we're
people's
in G
key.
and D a lot, you know.
The people's key.
D,
G is the people's
A.
key.
We like those. We like those sharp, those open sharp keys. So
Yeah, I understand D is the happiest key. And in folk music, I heard somebody call G the people's key. So
I like that.
he
All
wrote a
right.
song about tractors. Anyway,
Gotta be in G.
so um,
Yeah, man.
so how's it going? You're staying busy coming out of all this COVID? Are you getting busy back into the real world of playing live?
I am. This fall is definitely seems like it's business as usual until further notice.
Hmm.
But the pandemic for me actually has been a a welcome opportunity to be able to focus on not playing for a minute because when you're on the road a lot, you're always preparing for the next gig. There's some new piece to learn or whatever, new repertoire, and you're practicing, you're always doing that thing, and you never get to just put your fiddle down and do other stuff. And so for me, like the whole pandemic thing was I didn't practice for like a year. Believe it or not.
Oh,
I really focused on educational stuff, which is really unusual for me to ever have the opportunity to put it aside for that long, and to be able to really focus on teaching and educational pursuits. So I kind of started this. My whole thing, for string players, people who aren't familiar with me, is getting string players to groove, basically, in a nutshell. We string players are not known for our rhythm, unfortunately. It's a bad rep that we have garnered, but for good reason. It's absolutely true. I can back that up. Most string players don't have great rhythm, and it has to do with the way that we're taught. And so I sort of have started to uh, try my best to correct that and to provide some materials for string players who want to learn how to groove. And I developed this method over the last 20 years called strum bowing, which is just ripping off you guitar players basically.
basically,
Um,
yeah.
because my attitude is, it's all about just strumming, using your bow like you're strumming a guitar. That's kind of the whole definition of it. And I figure if guitar players can do it, how hard could it be? So that's kind of
I'll
where.
send that ball back over the net a little later in the interview, okay?
And so that's kind of the premise of it, is just like, let's just do what guitar players have been doing, which is basically backing people up, which is guitar players. It wasn't really until the electric guitar and compression and sustain started letting guitar players sound more like violinists, right? Where you could get these long singing lines, which before that it was more like classical guitar or jazz guitar. You didn't have that kind of melodic capability. And so it's almost going in reverse for us string players. We have all of this melodic stuff that we've learned since the lesson one is, how to get a nice tone and then how to play in tune. And it's all about playing melody or melodically. And when that advances, it turns into virtuosity and stuff. But we never, ever learn how to just back somebody up. How do you just, play chords for somebody, back up a singer, back up a soloist on the blues, right? Easy enough. If you're a guitar player, you learn that in the first month. Your first lesson, you learn three chords and you can play,
Get
you
out of the
know,
way. Yeah.
whatever. But so that just never happens with string players, and it's not, and it's because it's not a chordal instrument. We don't have frets. We're not set up in fourths the way the guitar is for. We don't have six strings. We only have four. So there are some, and it's a curved bridge, which is designed to play one string at a time. That's the whole point. We're sort of an extension of the voice. But if you put six strings on a violin, and by the way, that's not a new development. There were six-string viols back in the early Baroque and Renaissance
Hmm.
period. And Bach, in fact, wrote for the cello, the sixth cello suite is written for a six-string viol. Um,
Huh.
So yeah, so there is a history for this, and we're kind of getting back to the idea of having these lower strings. And what's here? Let me just.
Hmm.
So I have these low strings. So you have the violin strings plus a viola C string plus a fifth below that. You got this low F, and so that low F is like your first fret on a guitar, right? It's a half step above your open low E. So what happens is now that we have six strings on a violin, you have the ability, we have that lower register. And the lower register of the instrument is really important, not just so that you can play, like a cello kind of line down here, you know, um, but it means that we have that extra octave that you don't have on a violin is the bass register. That's what, when a guitar player is playing chords, they're always using bass notes in that lower register. Otherwise, you're basically like a ukulele. And you don't have that octave that we really need. The ear needs that register to feel
Right.
like there's a full chord accompanying a singer or something. I mean, you can do it with a mandolin or ukulele or violin, but you're missing that octave. So now that we have that octave, we can function as a chordal instrument. Um, but the question is, how to play chords when we have this curved bridge and we're needing to sort of arpeggiate, like a six string chord like a guitar player would.
Hmm.
So that's how I kind of got into this whole thing was, well, how can I accompany a singer by myself as if I was a rhythm guitar player and be a rhythm string player, right? And just go like, or if you're gonna, I turn off this delay, if you're like a, you can play a full blues progression for somebody and back it up with bass notes. So that's kind of been my whole trip, has been using the strings as a chordal instrument, and how that changes the whole world for string players. And hopefully the way strings will be used in contemporary music, where it's not just the pretty icing on the cake, as a string section,
Right.
but like the rhythm guitar, something that's a part of the rhythm section and adding its tonal um, vibe as a string instrument, sort of a whole new type of rhythm that comes out, because it's like a guitar. What I'm doing is based on the guitar, but it's a little different. It sounds a little different. It's a little bit
Mhm.
like a cello guitar or something like that.
So let's talk about your philosophy on on the role of the violin, as opposed to the you are definitely anarchistic to the paradigm of how we think of string instruments. And so please share
I'm
with
an
us this philosophy.
anarchist.
I love this about you, man. Like, this is why we're friends, because, like, oh, good, look, rules. We have something to break now, and
Exactly.
but really, it isn't just I think in this case, your anarchy is a necessary, relevant anarchy. As all arts progress, they progress as per their technology, as part of the way they progress. And so this is part of your story. So please.
Yeah. Well, it seemed like I started doing this back in the 80s, believe it or
Mhm.
not, right after I got out of the Juilliard school. I graduated there, got my degree, which my parents really insisted that I get. And I'm glad I did, because it does intimidate my students. But so it does have some real value in the world for me. But I immediately took a left turn and joined rock bands and was playing
Yeah.
metal and like my first band was this prog rock like Genesis band that rehearsed in the basement of a bagel store in Co-op City in the Bronx. Um, so that's kind of was the sharp left turn that I took out of Lincoln Center up to the Bronx, uh, and I just realized, it seemed like there was a moment in history where the electric guitar, they'd taken a guitar and electrified it, and these guys, wanted me in the band because they wanted me to, they're like, you're from Juilliard, you're gonna be like Paganini, man, you gotta,
Yeah.
like Jerry Goodman and Mahavishnu, and they were all about it, and I grew up. I mean, I listened to those records, especially like the Mahavishnu stuff, just burned the grooves right out of the record. Jerry Goodman, and I knew all those licks, but as much as I loved those records, like the tone of the violin was just acoustic. It was just this like thin acoustic violin sound, and no shade to Jerry Goodman, who is a huge influence on me. Um, but the technology wasn't there. And I was like, and so I plugged this. I had an old Junker acoustic violin that I brought to my first band rehearsal at Co-op City, and these guys were playing just massive sound system. The guitar player had a stack. The keyboard player had a whole keyboard rig with a PA system and several keys, Prophet 5 down here, something over there, and he had the Rick Wakeman cape and everything. He was really into it, and and I show up with this little acoustic violin and a little Roland Cube amp, because I had been playing like with a
Yeah, I
little
see
amp
how you
tune,
are. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and tried to crank it up, and the thing just fed back like crazy. And the
Right.
guy was like, "You got to find. There's this guy. I heard about this guy out on Long Island named Mark Wood, who makes electric violins. You got to get an electric solid body because it's feeding back too much."
Oh, we talked to
So,
him the other day, actually.
did you really?
Mark and Greg. Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
I
Very
believe we have the
cool.
first ever interview with those two guys at the same time in the same interview.
Ah, very
Very cool.
nice.
Yeah.
And I'm going to
Anyway,
take a quick second and open this door because my cat, I don't know if you can hear him, but he's
no.
absolutely driving me crazy. Either get in here or go out, but
Oh, my cat will probably hear that now and start doing the same
he
thing.
is so loud. He just doesn't shut up.
You have to let me in, Dad.
Ah. Anyway, um, so they told me about Mark Wood, and I found him somehow. This is pre-internet, long before the internet, but I somehow found him online. Found his phone number, and um, and gave him a call. And sure enough, the next thing he started making me electric violins, and we started rectifying the situation so that I could crank up to the volumes needed in the basement of the bagel store.
So then, when you're in rock bands and you're throwing on electric violins and you're jamming it through, amps and pedal effects and stuff like that, the next question becomes, who are your favorite guitar players?
Ah,
Guitar players.
well, that is the question because I really favored guitar players much more than violin players, string players.
Mhm.
Um, Guitar players and horn players. I was really into Miles Davis and John Coltrane for a good bit there, before really kind of turning to the dark side and being a total Hendrix fan, which is really kind of what I started out, what kicked off my whole love for the electric violin was that the love of that sound of feedback and just the you know those soaring dips that he would do with the whammy bar and all that kind of stuff seemed very possible, very doable on the electric violin. Um, Although I think Mark Wood and I were the only ones who really heard that sound and kept going like, yeah, we're almost there, we're almost there, whereas everybody else heard what we were doing and was like, that sounds terrible. You guys need
Really?
to because the technology wasn't really there. We didn't really know. Oh, yeah.
Let's put him on the show. He's just looking for
Oh,
a little validation, probably,
God.
along with everybody else in this biz, right?
Sorry, exactly.
It's
But sorry to
okay.
give you editing to do after the fact. But
I will leave
um,
him in. It's good TV.
um, the technology wasn't there. We weren't quite sure what amps to use, what effect pedals to use, how to set them. The strings, we didn't have the low F string yet. There was all kinds of the pickups were being improved, and so that we had this vision of sounding like Jimi Hendrix, but what we really ended up sounding more like was screechy violins for a while. But eventually we kind of figured it out and really learned how to design our sound and how to use the equipment that is really basically built for guitar players.
Hmm.
And all of this gear is designed to sound great with the dynamic range and frequency range of the guitar. Violin is very different. With a bow, you have all this high frequency energy that you don't need exaggerated through a Marshall cabinet, for instance, things like that, or Marshall head. But so we figured out how to deal with that and how to get a beautiful singing guitar-like sound. And it often came from, really rolling the high end way down on the amp and things like that.
Right, right. But it also seems like the instrument actually offers things that an electric guitar player would not have available on a guitar. Like, because,
Yeah,
I mean, obviously they're two different instruments, really
yeah,
closely related in this context, but there are other things that are offered that you don't get. What would
yeah.
you say that is, since your chin is on it, what does that from your
Yeah,
point of
well,
view?
for sure the bow changes everything, right?
Hmm.
Because it's such a sophisticated tool compared to a plectrum, a pick. There's so many layers of of attack that you can do with a bow. It's really designed to have an incredible a variety of articulation, and of course the sustain and the ability to crescendo to get louder during a sustain, which is something you can only do with a volume pedal on a guitar.
Hmm.
So there's all of these those differences, which are dramatic, um, and often is a matter for me imitating a guitar. It's a matter of really limiting which of those uses of the bow I'm going to take advantage of because I'm trying to not sound classical. So much of the use of the bow is designed to sound classical, so using the bow in a very unorthodox way, which is the whole idea of part of the whole strum bowing concept. But of course, it's tuned differently. So we have, we're in fifths, so we can kind of, and the notes are closer. So in a way, we can kind of speed and be faster on the neck than guitar players do because we don't have to cover so much real estate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, definitely. That's the effect I get. It seems like there's more facility for melody on
Yeah,
a violin anyway. If I had to take a wild guess, it's so close to what a vocalist can do. I mean, the vocal has the
yeah,
most melodic facility, I think, because it's connected to the brain. but because of its non-frettedness, probably because of the shorter neck, maybe, the physics of it, it just
Yeah,
always seems a little more able to be, well, I guess it's also designed to be a melodic instrument to begin
yeah,
with.
it sure is. It sure is. And in fact, one of the dangers of having a bow with just endless sound is that it's really easy to not sound vocal sometimes when you're soloing. For instance, I have to remind my students to stop and breathe the way you would if you were a sax player, because there's something very organic about the way a horn player solos, right? You know, how they will um, play a line and take a breath. And I mean, unless they're circular
Right.
breathing, you're playing a there's always these very vocal like breaths that
The breath
remind
becomes
us
part of the music, actually, in that instance. If you plan it and manage it, then it is there for a rest, you know?
exactly, and it imitates the rhythm of speech, which we tend to speak in sentences, and then breathe in between those sentences while we're thinking of something else to say. So, this is a very a sort of it's an intuitive, very human, logical way to communicate, which string players and guitar players can sometimes ignore because we don't have to breathe in the same
And we
way.
can continue
So,
to babble.
exactly, I call it wandering in the desert. Um, when my students just sort of like feel like they got to just keep playing and playing and playing and playing and playing, I'm like,
Yeah,
no, stop, take a
right.
breath.
Yeah, I call it the woods. Come back out of the woods. You'll
Exactly.
never find your way back if you go any further. Cool. So when you're at Juilliard, while you
Yeah,
have advanced significantly from the ideas of Juilliard, what are
yeah,
some of the blessings that you found in Juilliard that you think are still relevant for any player these days?
yeah. Well, I've spent a certain amount of my energy and what I've speak about in interviews often is how to change the classical paradigm, the classical conservatory pedagogy, and what that's about, and why that doesn't do justice to contemporary string players all the time who are trying to advance beyond classical music.
Hmm.
Uh, I'll get back to that in a minute because that's my main refrain in life these days. But I almost always, if I remember, preface that with the fact that I started in classical music. I grew up with a lot of classical music as well as jazz and rock in our house between what my dad listened to, what my big brother listened to, and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of it was classical music, and I started out with a deep love for a lot of classical music, symphonic stuff, the violin repertoire, and couldn't have been happier to have the opportunity to be prepared for Juilliard by my parents, who were able to afford to give me violin lessons all my childhood, which is a huge advantage a lot of people don't get. Um, to get into Juilliard and to be, at the sort of pinnacle of that classical world, and to see what that's like, it's sort of like being, in the Olympic Village, and living with
Right.
like the Olympic athletes, and my class was Nigel Kennedy and Bobby McDuffie and Jimmy Lynn and Nadia Salerno Sonnenberg. We were all there at the same time in the late 70s at Juilliard, and it was exhilarating and completely intimidating to be there. And, I kind of came from Beloit, Wisconsin, where I was, the big deal in a very small pond in a puddle. And then suddenly to be in the Atlantic Ocean, at Juilliard. There's a lot of good that comes from that, but I have to say it kind of showed me that that wasn't what I wanted to do. Only
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and not because there was anything particularly wrong with it. It definitely prepares people for the rigors of the classical world, whether you're as a soloist or as an orchestral player. But I started out as a composer as well as a player. I was always writing music, and I knew from listening, from my pretty deep understanding of classical composers like Bach and Mozart and Brahms and all those guys, that they were all writing in their contemporary style. Because, I would listen, me and my dad would listen to the classical radio station on the 2 hour drive from Beloit, Wisconsin to Chicago, where I took lessons every Saturday. And he would drive down there and we would drive back. And sometimes we'd have the classical music station on and we would play a little game where we would um, hear a piece of music and we'd try to guess who the composer was. And I was pretty good at it. A lot of times it wasn't a piece that I knew, but I knew it was from the Romantic period or it was from the Baroque period, and it sounded like Bach, but it was a little bit, maybe it was Purcell because it had a little bit of an English twist to it, or maybe it was late Romantic, but it wasn't German Romantic, it was some other thing. So I was pretty good at understanding the classical repertoire and composers. So I knew that these guys were all writing in their own contemporary idiom, right? Bach was writing in the Baroque period. 40 years later, Mozart was writing in this Viennese classical style. And then a few years later, you had Brahms writing in this very romantic German style, and Tchaikovsky was doing the Russian school. And I was like, well, I'm a composer. I'm supposed to be writing in my style, which is rock and roll or disco or whatever, it was the 70s pop music. Um, why are they not teaching any of that in the conservatory?
It is such an important point to discuss. I mean, really, I've always wondered. I mean, the reason why I'm a rock and roller is exactly for what you're saying. It's of my generation, it's of my people, it's of my time, it's in the parlance of our time. It's in our language
Yep.
and slang. Every part of it's in our fashion. Why would somebody want to play? I mean, aside from the fun of it, but like bank your whole
Yeah,
artistic
exactly.
identity on something that happened 400 years ago. Like I
Right.
just like
Well,
now,
the reason, sorry,
no, go ahead.
I was going to say the reason people do, put their whole career on music that's hundreds of years old is because it's so amazing. I mean, this is the hard thing, is that
True.
the repertoire of classical music it includes some of the most incredible masterpieces of human creation, right? So it's very hard to be dismissive of it. But on the other hand, you can't let that bit, sort of like the golden handcuffs, you can't let that tie you up and be so absorbed in the beauty that Bach wrote 300 years ago that you forget that your job as a musician, as a creative musician, um, uh, uh, you know, primarily as a composer, is to tell the truth, the musical truth of your time to your people, right? This
Awesome.
is this is a snapshot of my musical take on the world, right? So if I'm going to give you my musical snapshot of my take on the world and it doesn't include anything in the 20th century pop music, it's like, well, what musical world are you looking at? What is the world that you're seeing, and why are you
It
seeing it
becomes
through eyes that are 100 years old? Why don't you look at the world through contemporary eyes? And if you're going to do that, those eyes or ears include hip hop, everything that's, people listen to
well,
right now.
it would be like watching old early movies from the 1930s before they actually had sound. It just because that's what it is, and then you just continue to stay in that artistic time frame,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
like yeah. And the other thing to note that I think is interesting is all the people that you mentioned, Bach, Mozart, Brahms, etc. All of those guys pioneered it. They didn't necessarily, they made reference to a certain degree, because the king or the church or whatever, and things like that. but they still pushed it along, and they still brought it into their own parlance of their time.
Yeah.
And so I always find that very interesting, like in any genre of music, everybody wants to learn the complete set of John Lennon or something like that, and so do I. And I do know it, and all those things, but at the same time, it is of their time. And as a creative person, there are a couple kinds of musicians where they're more technicians who follow the sheet and find their place in the arrangement and they operate that way. And then there's people like yourself or myself who like to write it and compose it and organize it and make these. This is where a lot of those advancements or pushing the envelopes or anarchies, if you will, show up,
Yeah.
and pull us into our own time in an honest way. I love that you said that. I mean, I just learned something about myself when you said that. That's a great, fantastic observation. Because that's what I'm always trying to do, which is why we got into this magazine to begin with it. And this is what makes it authentic. So
Yeah, exactly.
thank
When
you.
people, we our job as artists is to tell the truth and to document our moment in history as we see it through our eyes. Like, what's great about Picasso is he looked at the world in a way that nobody looked at it before. And he went, this is the way I see it. Look at this. Just look at the way I see this. And his vision of that was completely influenced by the other contemporary artists around him who were looking at the world in a new way. Matisse and Monet and all of the impressionists and the expressionists and the cubists and looking at all that and going like, oh, I can fragment this geometry and this is a new way. This is the way I'm looking at the world. And if he was just looking at Rembrandt from 300 years ago and was like, perfectly able to recreate the kind of shading and nuance that Rembrandt did, which was new back in the 1500s or whenever he painted. If that was what Picasso did, it was like, well, Rembrandt already did that. See
Right.
ya, and nobody would ever know the name Picasso, but he didn't. He showed us the world in a new way that he saw it, that was idiosyncratic to him, and it was telling his truth and his version of the world and which had never been seen before. And
Right.
that is every musician's job, is to try to find a way to see the world in a way that nobody else has quite, or hear the world in a way that nobody else has quite heard it before, right? I'm hearing something a little bit different. And in order to do that, you have to be listening to the real world and not the world of 300 years ago. You just can't.
And you have to be listening with a certain confidence, because I know plenty musicians who will let those things go because it's not always in a comfortable, familiar place. A lot of people just play what's familiar. I call it, they play what they know. Can we play
Yep.
something we don't know now?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important distinction to make when you are in this role as a musician. You have
No,
to pull the carpet out from under yourself. I spent a lot of time artistically just being uncomfortable with myself, because
yeah.
those are the woods where we seek the truth.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. And you also have to be uncomfortable with not making some money because, for instance,
Oh,
I could
really?
have taken a much more lucrative path in my life and,
Right.
played what people expect me to play and get those gigs and be very comfortable. And instead, I've been like a salmon swimming upstream all my life and trying to show people that something could sound, you know, uh, something new could happen with strings, and that they don't have to sound terrible. Electric violin can sound good if you know what you're doing,
Hmm.
and all of that kind of stuff, which was just working against a lot of financial considerations.
You know what? I have no regrets for the decisions I've made. I think, there's a lot of money in the world, but I definitely, and I would bet the same for you, is that I am definitely a wealthy man with the experiences that the music path brought me, you
Yeah.
know. Um, I don't have that big old Cadillac necessarily, but I like what's in my car.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's it exactly, man. The tape deck still works.
yeah, the tape deck still works. So does the little pencil. You know how the erasers get hard after a while and they just kind of slip? Nah, I got the good kind.
Oh
Top
yeah.
rated stuff. All right, so you're all over the net and you have all kinds of things going on, and you have, your own station for violin works and teaching and so on. Where do the folks find you?
Yeah, well, so my strum bowing stuff is what I've really been focusing on. Of course, I've got a website, tracysilverman.com. There's strumbowing.com, which is kind of the headquarters for a lot of that stuff. And on there, you'll find a link to my online strum bowing groove academy, which is my online teaching courses, which is hosted by teachable.com. And that's primarily where a lot of my stuff lives. People can find that. I also have a podcast called For the Greater Groove, and it's all about the future of strings, subtitle. For the Greater Groove, the future of strings. And it's all about this idea of using strings as a rhythm instrument as opposed to the melodic life that strings have always had. And there's a Facebook group for that as well, the For the Greater Groove Facebook group, and I'm trying to really bring a lot of my fellow progressive string players who I've been interviewing, guys like Christian Howes and Daryl Anger and Mark O'Connor and Casey Dreesen and Julie Lyon Lieberman and David Wallace, Mimi Raps, and all folks like that who are really leaders in the progressive string world and who are kind of like-minded people to myself in terms of this new role for strings. So been giving them a place to speak about what they do, to demonstrate. We do a little groove hack thing in each segment where we sort of back engineer, reverse engineer a groove from a record and show how we do it on strings. The whole idea being to show young string players this is possible, this is necessary, this is the next evolution in string playing, and we're here to help you figure it out. So.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks for that. And we thank you for being here with us. It's always a pleasure. So
Always good to talk to you,
everybody,
Chuck.
yeah, you too, Tracy. So everybody go hit all those sites. You saw them. They're over here off to the side of this interview. You can hit all the links and see all the stuff and keep your violin playing intact. If you had a good time, make sure you hit our like button. You sign up for our newsletter. Find us on all the social media stuff. We're everywhere all the time. And oh, wait, more importantly, if you have a question or something you'd like to ask otherwise or want to know from Mr. Silverman here, send us the question. We'll send it to him. He'll be happy to talk about it. He's going to have his own column here. Make sure you visit the Tracy Silverman column over here and stay in touch. If you have ideas about what you'd like to see here at Inside Cool, if you know somebody who you feel is doing something really cool in a very authentic way, we want to know about it. So write me a letter. My name's Chuck Sheely. Thanks for stopping by Inside Cool. Have a great day.